The call and the smile. I'll never forget that night. I was working the late shift at Tony's Pizza, a small shop in a quiet town. It was nearly closing time, and I was getting ready to lock up when the phone rang. I sighed, knowing it might mean one last delivery. "Tony's Pizza, how can I help you?" I answered, trying to sound upbeat. There was nothing but silence on the other end. After a few seconds, I hung up. A minute later, the phone rang again. This time, I hesitated before picking up. "Hello?" I said. At first, it was silent again, but then I heard a weak, shaky voice. "I need a pepperoni pizza delivered," the woman said. Her tone was faint and unsettling, like she was struggling to get the words out. I jotted down the address and told her it would be there soon. But before I could finish, she hung up abruptly. Something about the call left me feeling uneasy, but I brushed it off. Deliveries were deliveries. Tony, my boss, was already wrapping up for the night. "Just take this last one, James," he said. "Then you can go home." Reluctantly, I grabbed the pizza and plugged the address into my GPS. It was about 15 minutes away, in a quieter part of town I didn't usually deliver to. As I drove, the streets became darker and emptier, the houses farther apart. Finally, I pulled up to the housey, small, single-story building with no lights on. I walked to the door, pizza box in hand, and rang the bell. Nothing. I knocked and waited, but the house remained silent. Just as I was about to leave, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. In the window to my right, there was a figure. An older woman, maybe in her 70s, was standing there, staring at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Ma'am?" I called out. "I've got your pizza." She didn't respond. Instead, a slow, unnatural smile crept across her face, a smile so wide it looked painful. My stomach tightened, and a chill ran down my spine. "Do you want the pizza or not?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman's smile grew even wider. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and headed back to my car, tossing the pizza into the passenger seat. As I fumbled for my keys, I glanced at the house one last time. She was gone from the window. Relief washed over me until I turned my head and saw her. She was standing outside my car, right next to the passenger door, her blank eyes fixed on me. My heart nearly stopped. I jammed the key into the ignition and floored it, speeding down the empty street without looking back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. When I got back to the shop, I told Tony everything. He shrugged it off, but I refused to do another late-night delivery. To this day, I can't drive past that part of town without feeling like she's watching me, waiting for me to stop again. The man behind the cottage. It was my last delivery of the night, and I was ready to head home. I worked at Mike's Pizza in a small rural town in Michigan, where most deliveries meant long drives down dirt roads to isolated houses. The address for this delivery was no different, 15 minutes deep into the woods, leading to a lakeside cottage. The sun was just starting to set when I left the shop, the sky a mix of orange and purple. By the time I arrived, darkness had completely taken over. The cottage was old and weathered, its wooden exterior barely visible in the faint light of my car's headlights. The surrounding lawn was overgrown, with grass almost up to my knees. I grabbed the pizza and approached the front door, noticing immediately that it was slightly ajar. I knocked anyway, calling out, "Pizza delivery!" Footsteps echoed from inside, heavy and deliberate. They stopped just on the other side of the door, and for a moment everything was silent. Then a low, gravelly voice responded, "Bring it around back." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. "Are you sure, sir?" I asked, hesitating. "Bring it to the patio," the voice snapped. I should have left then and there, but I didn't want to deal with complaints from my boss about another undelivered pizza. With a deep breath, I trudged through the tall grass, circling the house toward the back. The patio was small, with a rusted table and 4 chairs. One of the chairs was occupied by a figure, slumped forward and facing away from me. "Sir," I called out, my voice shaking slightly. No response. I stepped closer, clutching the pizza box tightly. "Excuse me," I said again, louder this time. The figure didn't move, and I began to notice something was off. The head wasn't tilted, natural light was stiff. Almost like, "Over here," a voice hissed from behind me. I whipped around to see a man peering out from behind the corner of the house, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He was grinning, his teeth yellow and uneven. "Come here," he said, motioning with one hand. "I want to show you something." My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt frozen. "What's going on?" I managed to stammer. The man stepped closer, his grin widening. That was all it took to break me. I spun around and bolted, the pizza still in my hands. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, slamming the door shut and locking it with trembling fingers. As I started the engine, I glanced back toward the patio. The figure in the chair was gone. I didn't wait to find out more. I sped down the dirt road, not daring to look in my rearview mirror. Halfway back to the shop, I pulled over and called the police. When they arrived at the cottage, they found no signs of anyone living there. The house had been abandoned for years, but they did find something unsettling: a single chair on the patio, its seat covered in fresh blood. I quit my delivery job the next day. Whatever was waiting for me at that cottage, I knew I'd come far too close to finding out. The passenger in the back seat. A few years ago, I worked as a pizza delivery driver in a small mountain town in Colorado. The area was surrounded by dense forests, and most deliveries meant navigating narrow, winding roads through the wilderness. Late-night shifts were always a little eerie, but one night stood out, night I'll never forget. It was foggy and unusually quiet as I drove toward my last delivery. The address was in a remote cabin tucked deep in the woods, a good 20 minutes from the shop. My car's headlights barely pierced the thick fog, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires. As I rounded a bend, something leapt out from the bushes directly into my path. I slammed on the brakes, but the car thudded against something solid, and I skidded to a stop. My heart raced as I stared at the dark road ahead. "I hit someone," I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. I grabbed a flashlight and got out, my hands shaking. Lying by the side of the road was a man in a black hoodie, motionless. His hood was pulled up, obscuring his face. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, taking a cautious step closer. He didn't respond. Panic set in. Why was he out here, in the middle of nowhere? Suddenly, a faint scream cut through the fog. It was distant, but unmistakable, a cry for help coming from the woods. I looked back at the man on the ground, still unmoving, and felt torn. "I'll only be gone a minute," I told myself, shining the flashlight toward the trees. I stepped into the woods, calling out, "Hello, do you need help?" The forest was eerily silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. As I moved deeper in, the scream came again, closer this time. My flashlight beam swept across the trees, searching for the source. That's when I saw a figure standing behind a tree, just barely visible in the fog. It was tall and still, as if it were watching me. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure didn't move. My instincts screamed at me to run, and I turned back toward the road, tripping over roots as I fled. When I reached my car, the man I'd hit was gone. Panic gripped me as I scrambled back inside and locked the doors. I started the engine and drove away, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. The fog seemed thicker now, swallowing the road behind me. When I finally reached the delivery address, I forced myself to calm down. The house was small and well lit, and a middle-aged woman answered the door. As she handed me the cash, her eyes drifted past me to my car. "Oh," she said casually. "You have someone with you?" I froze. "What do you mean?" She gestured toward the back seat. "There's a man sitting in your car." A cold wave of terror washed over me. I turned slowly to look and saw a shadowy figure hunched in the back seat, watching me. I bolted back to the house, slamming the door behind me. The woman called the police while I stood there trembling. When the officers arrived, the man was gone. But they found something chilling: a blood-stained knife lying on the floor of my car. I quit my job the next day. To this day, I can't drive alone at night without checking the back seat constantly, haunted by the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't noticed him in time.